Natalie Bencivenga.
And I'm Tony Norman, and this is In Other News, the podcast that is not afraid to go there.
Where?
Anywhere the story takes us. You concerned about speaking your mind?
Me? Yeah, right. You?
Ha! Let's go, Nat.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 9 of In Other News. I am your co-host, Natalie Bencivenga, with my awesome co-host, Tony Norman. How are you today, Tony?
Great. Episode 9.
Can you believe that?
Oh, man, I tell you. It's my lucky number.
Oh, is it?
Well, every number is my lucky number. But,
we don't discriminate.
We got 9 of these under our belt.
I know.
All right.
I'm so proud of us. But there is so much to talk about, as always. So let's dive right into hot takes. All right. So, what's really been interesting about doing In Other News together is we've really been able to take a look at the way media functions and be critical with our own lens as journalists and as consumers of media around this very topic. And so we found this really great article from the Keystone Newsroom on media literacy. And recently, Senator Katie Muth, a Democrat from Berks County, introduced Senate Bill 496, which would require schools to provide a class for students in grades K through 12 that focus on critical thinking skills and knowledge necessary to evaluate the accuracy of news stories. What do you think of that as a bill?
Well, it sounds like a great thing, but I feel that discernment is something that should have been a part of the curriculum already. How to discern truth from fiction. But I think when it comes to the press, when it comes to media, there really does need to be this larger intention to show through examples, what a lie is, how it can propagate, in this ecosystem, and how to respond to it. So I think that's a very, very good deal. We'll give students a leg up, because media literacy really is the name of the game.
It really is. And, now that everybody's basically getting their news on social media,
yes.
and you're just sort of swiping as we scroll, it's really easy to become quickly misinformed just by reading clickbait headlines. But, a lot of these news outlets have been very intentional in misleading us.
Right.
And not just now, but for decades. And I remember, when we're going all the way back to George W. and the start of Fox News in the late 90s, and Al Gore and the Hanging Chads and CNN and the 24-hour news cycle, and creating this arena of entertainment as it relates to media. Do you think that did a disservice to us now, like in retrospect?
It undermined our very democracy because we stumbled into Afghanistan, and we stumbled into Iraq in terms of the cost of human lives and treasure, both to Americans and to the civilians of those countries. It's incalculable. And in both cases, I would say, especially in Iraq, the missions, the very logic of going into those countries were precipitated by lies.
Oof. You know what? That is so powerful when you say it just so directly, because now the New York Times, I don't know if you saw this article recently, but they were saying, why'd we even go into Iraq? That was wild. Why'd we do that? And
who were the warmongers?
What's happening? And it was interesting because obviously, if you look back 20 years ago, the New York Times was very instrumental in all of these pieces of the puzzle that have led us to this moment. Do you think it's incredibly hypocritical of them to be talking out of both sides like this?
Absolutely. I mean, they were defending Judith Miller, who was their primary reporter on the Iraq story, the invasion, and justifying the actions of the United States, in every article. And let me tell you, it was not a popular position.
Well, you were very much personally attacked.
Yes, I was called Taliban Tony, by readers, and I can tell you that a lot of my colleagues at the Post-Gazette at the time, on the editorial board, and even fellow columnists, were saying, hey Tony, this does not feel right. I mean, this war is good, and you're on the outside, and I just felt nope. I'm just going to stick to my guns. And I remember one night, just sort of covering the march in Oakland on Fifth Avenue. It was snowing, and it was with the Thomas Merton Center, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other protesters and dissenters walking through the snow. And I'm quoting people for my column in which they were saying, "No to war, no to war, no to war." And then at one point, they all stopped at an intersection of Fifth Avenue, and they fell down in the middle of the street and just made snow angels. And I joined them. And when I went into work the next day, and I admitted that I had done this and that I, quote, given up my objectivity, boy, the reception was brutal.
That's amazing.
And I just thought, you know what? At a certain point, your humanity has to say something to your responsibilities as a journalist.
That's incredible, Tony. Thanks so much for sharing that anecdote. I think of your trajectory, and it's like, look where you started, and now look where you are. And we have things that we're even working on together outside of the podcast. We're going to be moderating a debate/town hall event on April 18th with Public Source, with NEXTpittsburgh. And Charlie Wolfson from Public Source is going to be joining us. And it's for the county executive race, which has been wild. If you guys aren't following it, it's very dramatic. People are dropping in, dropping out left and right. We're going to be down to the wire looking at our notes. But why is this race so important now that Rich Fitzgerald is no longer able to run? What makes this so necessary for people to pay attention to?
Well, first of all, people probably don't realize that the county executive office is really, in the state of Pennsylvania, is the third most important office in the state. It follows the governor, which is number one, the mayor of Philadelphia, which is number two, and the county executive of of Allegheny County is number three, just in terms of influence. And this seat is opening up for the first time in many, many years, nearly a decade, if I have that correct. And so there's a lot of scrambling for it. And here in Allegheny County, in Pittsburgh in particular, there are various factions, a reform faction and the old Democratic machine that are vying for ultimate supremacy here. And so it's fascinating on a soap opera-ish level.
Yes.
Who's gonna get that jump ball? And there's so many interesting characters. And so we're gonna have fun.
We're gonna have a lot of fun
quizzing them.
Absolutely. And if people want to be a part of it, they can come watch it live. It's going to be at the Point Park Center for Media Innovation downtown. We're also going to be streaming it online. Yep. And of course, we're going to be taking questions from the audience live and streaming. But if you have questions ahead of time, Tony and I are going to be doing our homework with Charlie over the next few weeks. So we welcome the perspectives and the thoughts of our community members. So please shoot us an email and let us know. We'll put our email in the links with our action items. But, I would be remiss if we didn't give a few updates on what's been going on at the University of Pittsburgh. The transphobic speakers are still set to be here soon, and the debate around the experience of being transgender is still going to happen. And of course, in response, the University of Pittsburgh students are bravely going to be protesting in multiple ways over multiple days in the coming days. So be sure to stay with us. We're going to be chatting with Ciora Thomas during the Drilldown. She is the founder and executive director of SisTersPGH, and we're going to be talking to her about her organization, her work, and what she thinks of what's happening at the University of Pittsburgh. So stay tuned.
You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for joining us. Well, we are back with the Drilldown, and we are so honored to have our guest for this week, Ciora Thomas. She is the founder and executive director of SisTersPGH. It is so good to see you. How are you, Ciora?
It's good to see you too. I'm doing good. Despite, the turmoil of things going on in the world, I'm doing fairly well.
That is good to hear. Before we launch into said turmoil, I think it's important that everyone knows a little bit more about you and your work with SisTersPGH. So could you share a little bit about your story?
Yeah. So I'm a Pittsburgh native. I was born in Homewood. Grew up in
Oh.
Homewood. I'm more of a East Side girl.
Mm.
Other than that, it's kind of foreign town to me in Pittsburgh. But um, I was pushed out of the home as a young person when I started to
Oh.
transition,
Mm.
and that pushed me to be downtown.
Mhm.
Back in the day, Liberty Avenue, that was a place for trans people, specifically Black trans women, to be.
Mm.
And if you were there in those times, I'm sure Friday, Saturday nights, you saw groups of
Mhm.
trans women on Liberty Avenue.
You're talking about the 1980s Ciora?
Y- yeah, and above, uh,
Mhm.
before the gentrification started to happen
Right.
downtown.
Mhm.
And because that was essentially our spot where we worked as sex workers, as well as I and a couple other my sisters, we slept in Point State Park.
Oh.
So that's where we would sleep at night as young people, or the subway station, the T station. So we would be in these different areas, homeless. And I remember one night I was just tired. I was tired of living like this. I've experienced all the nonprofits, the queer nonprofits that were, here to say they were here to support us, but there was nothing tangible actually happening to shift my marginalization
Mm.
as a marginalized trans Black person in Pittsburgh.
Mm.
So I figured, why not do it myself? And I did.
Mm.
And
What year are we talking? What year was this,
oh
Ciora?
my gosh, I started Sisters officially around 2010.
Mhm.
Okay.
Um, prior to that, things were in the making around 2005, and I'm 34, so I was like
Okay.
still a very young person.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Navigating these different places, and navigating how to run a nonprofit,
Yeah.
and not only that, but not run a nonprofit under this nonprofit industrial complex
Mm.
that seems to navigate through Pittsburgh a lot. We have like
Mhm.
the most nonprofits in the country, the world, right here in Pittsburgh in Allegheny County. So, um, which says a lot to service provision for marginalized people. But here we are now.
Mm.
So
So.
when you're talking to that space of sort of the industrialized complex of
Mhm.
philanthropy in Pittsburgh, what were you seeing that were the problems, the barriers to receiving care and support?
Mm.
Yeah, so there were, and this is a lot of what I didn't know then,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But what I do know now is that there were just a lot of savior complexes going on. There were a lot of funding that were not being directed to marginalized communities. And because we were not in a space to lead,
Mm.
we were
Mm.
homeless, we were addicted to drugs, we were, just disenfranchised completely. So there was no time for any of us to stop and say, oh, let's lead something, let's pull ourselves up, out of these situations. And but once I started to get into the field of nonprofit work, I just noticed there were a lot of white queer gatekeepers within our community that were gatekeeping funding, that were not interested in sharing those funding opportunities, and because I am the demographic that needs the funding.
Mm.
Mhm.
And when you put the money in the hands of those who need the money, that takes away from the resource from that savior complex that I spoke of earlier.
So was the opposition to you? Was it subtle or was it blatant? And was it basically racial and class snobbery at that point?
Oh, absolutely. As I began navigating the nonprofit world and being able to have access to these funders that also fund larger LGBTQ centers or spaces, and I was able to actually explain to them what's actually going on, how my girls are not getting served, and not just my
Mm.
girls, my trans community is not getting served. And that started to shift things. And it turned into a lot. Like, I deal with so much stuff behind the scenes, like with different orgs, the racism, the white supremacy that we experience in Pittsburgh, and attempts to derail my work, turn my community against me. There's all these things that are happening. I have not been swayed. Like, I'm a strong girl, but all these things are still happening. And I've traveled around the country and I've seen what Black trans leadership looks like. There are hundreds of Black trans-led organizations around the country that are being led by a predominance of Black trans women. And I knew in Pittsburgh, I was going to have a challenge because Pittsburgh has never seen Black trans leadership at this capacity by a Black trans woman before. So, here I am.
Well, here you are, and we're so glad that you're here. And, I've admired you and your work for many years, but listening to you talk about what's going on around the country and visiting spaces around the country, is it alarming to you or not surprising to you at the level of conversation around the erasure of trans and gender expansive people through actual policy and putting laws on the books?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's happening everywhere. That's why we have the need of having, nonprofits and groups for trans people, because cisgender people have failed to serve us correctly. So in essence, when these things are being created, when these bills are being created, trans people are not in the room to add to the conversation. And that's done on purpose. A lot of these politicians have never. And I've navigated our Pittsburgh government, our county government, a lot of our politicians know who I am, in our area. And, but I've navigated it in a way that I've also learned on how these systems are functioning, when it comes to trans people. And as long as we are quiet and suppressed and don't shake their table, we're invited to the table. But the moment we shake their table, they're afraid and they pull back, from actual accountability, in order to do something different within the society. So,
well, Ciora, there's been so much violence against Black trans women, particularly in this area. And I wonder if you think that the dysfunction between, let's say, the white trans, is it white trans establishment or white LGBT establishment, and plus the foundations has contributed to this in some way by not concentrating on the big problem, which was violence against, your community in particular, your slice of the community?
Well, the issue is, as long as we are marginalized, they stay in business. So that has been another issue that we're facing, in these situations. I talk about this a lot. Like, when I founded Sisters, I literally looked up what a nonprofit is in a book dictionary. Not even I didn't Google it. I looked in a book dictionary and read what a nonprofit was. And what I got out of that is, you start something, you address an issue within community, to a point you are no longer needed. And that's what I understood it to be. And to have spaces that have been typically white, queer, and trans, folks who have been benefiting off of our marginalization. And I'll say since I was a kid, because that was a generation I came from, and it's still going on. We serve majority of, if not all, trans folks. They come through our organization, but just seeing those spaces that have historically had access to funding and resources and have not shifted the marginalization of trans or Black trans folks in Pittsburgh is a problem, especially as we see them getting richer and having larger salaries. These were things I weren't paying attention to back in the day, but now I get to see these people at these organizations. They're having six-figure salaries, and they're not being equitably resourceful to the community that really needs it.
Yeah. Honestly, we could sit and talk with Ciora about these issues all day. Ciora, as we wrap up, there's real tangible things happening in our community coming up at the University of Pittsburgh. There's going to be transphobic speakers. And there's, of course, protests to sort of fight that back happening Friday evening as well as Monday. Are you involved with any of these rallies? And what do you think about the fact that the University of Pittsburgh is hosting these people to debate the existence of transgender people?
Yeah, so firstly, I'll start with Pitt. I think it's egregious that, Pitt University would allow something like this to happen within a community that is already disenfranchised and still in a space of learning about trans issues.
Right.
We've done a lot of work to advocate for our trans communities over the years, over the 15 years I've been doing this work. And to see, and I've worked with Pitt. I've spoken at Pitt before, to students, and to see them go backwards, just to have a fight between this cisgender male and this trans woman, which is a whole other subject. She should be ashamed of herself. But to have this debate and call it freedom of speech when it can actually tarnish the lives of the students that are very well walking on that campus. So yeah, that's horrible. We are, I have heard about some protests going on, around the city. But when we first heard about this, what was going on at Pitt, we were the first to announce that we were hosting an event on Trans Day of Visibility, to center the needs and support of our Pitt students, as well as being visible as trans people. Would not a better day to be loud and proud and talk about this legislation, talk about Michael Knowles, talk about the representation that we need at Pitt University. And the most important thing, centering the voices of our trans youth. I think it's often not discussed on. I'm becoming an old head in our community.
At 34 too.
At 34,
give it up.
That's crazy. That's crazy. But I am, and I'm in a space now where we can not only financially support our trans youth, but we can also be a force to be reckoned with, because we have been doing so much work, in Pittsburgh to support our youth holistically, not just the pretend support where a lot of us adults show up in youth spaces and take it over and tell them what to do. And that's not how you do it. You let these kids do what they need to do, and we should be there to catch them if they fall. And, that's a part of my values, in this work, is making sure that we are building them up. So that'll be a day where, we're going to do just that.
That sounds amazing. For people that want to learn more about you and your work, how can they support SisTersPGH?
Yeah, they can visit our website, www.sisterspgh.org. It has all the things that you would need to be able to connect with us. We also welcome our trans community to our community center here, where I'm at now, to share space with other trans folks when we're open from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. We have several programs, for trans folks, as well as our transitional housing space, Project T, for any trans people of color who is experiencing homelessness, houselessness in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County. Project T is the place to be. So, yeah.
Sounds like good work.
Yes, it definitely does. Thank you so much, Ciora, for joining us.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for final thoughts. You're listening to In Other News.
Thanks for tuning in.
All right, we are back with final thoughts. Thank you again to Ciora for such an incredible conversation. But now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your column, Tony. And you've had some interesting people that you've been chatting with and researching. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on, what you got cooking?
Absolutely. Monday's column will feature a profile of LaToya Ruby Frazier, a name that's familiar to many people here in Pittsburgh, and especially Braddock, where she was born and raised. She was the 2015 MacArthur Genius Award recipient.
Wow.
And I believe she was actually the first person from this area to receive a MacArthur grant. She started the ball rolling for so many other people who followed her, who are from this area. She also won this in last year. She won the Carnegie International Prize, which is the top prize that's been given to artists since the late 1890s.
Wow.
So she is sharing that award with a couple anonymous folks like Pablo Picasso and Matisse and de Kooning.
Who?
Yeah, I know. Like nobody's,
Just whatever.
and it's quite an honor. And folks who know LaToya know that she is all about telling the story of Braddock. You know, using herself and her family to write about the intersection of pollution and the environment and racism and health disparities. She's been recognized with many awards for her work, but this is the show she has at the Carnegie International right now. It's the first time she's ever been invited to exhibit in Pittsburgh, which is astonishing.
Really?
Because she has a one-woman show
I didn't know that.
coming up at the Museum of Modern Art in Manhattan in New York, but she's only just now getting invitations to be here in Pittsburgh, to exhibit in Pittsburgh. And she's giving a lecture on Monday night at Carnegie Mellon. But the story I wrote is going to be wide-ranging. It's going to deal with some of her thoughts about her work and her responsibility to be socially responsible before aesthetically pleasing. You know, she just happens to be aesthetically pleasing with her work because she does not leave the people of Braddock out of her work. They are very much a part of her work.
Does
So
she
it's
talk a lot
fascinating.
about environmental justice in her work?
That is her primary thing. You know, she is someone who has suffered from lupus herself, she and her mom, and it has had a very big effect on her. And she got the prize for a work of art that deals with community healthcare workers in Baltimore, and it is not in the least bit didactic or social realism in the usual sense of the word. It is really beautiful and confrontational, and it is really having an effect. So read the article on Monday and see what LaToya Ruby Frazier is up to.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And speaking of confrontational, we are going to talk a little bit about an article that came out in the Pittsburgh City paper that really dovetails off of this conversation around advocates tout air monitoring investments as a vital step in the region's greener future. We saw, politicians like Summer Lee really being a big proponents of this. And of the $53 million from the EPA to local environmental organizations, $2 million almost was awarded to projects in Western PA because advocates are saying that regulating agencies like the Allegheny Health Department and the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection often are lacking the resources to effectively monitor and regulate the range of industrial polluters spanning Western PA. And
Wow.
It really makes me think of this quote I heard a while back where it said, there is no safe amount of air pollution. Because I think growing up in Western PA, my grandmother used to tell me when she'd ride the streetcars through East Liberty, she'd wear a blouse on the streetcar and then she'd have to change the blouse to go to work because by the time she got off the streetcar, it was black from all the soot. And so your mind goes, well, it looks clean out there. So we've made great strides, which we have to a point.
Right.
But there's a lot of things that are still going on under the surface.
Right. I mean, just because the sky is blue doesn't mean that there's no particulate matter. I mean, and right now, the region still has unconscionably high rates of asthma for children and for young people. And it really is not clean air in any classical definition of clean. And it's something we're all in denial about in this region. And we really do have to attend to it because, some of us, like myself, I have grandchildren and I don't want them, to develop asthma just because they happen to live here.
Absolutely. So if you get a chance, you can check out that article in the Pittsburgh City paper. We're also going to put links below this show's video so that you can learn more about organizations that are fighting for clean air and clean water here in Pennsylvania, because we are all breathing the same air. We're drinking the water. This is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue. So until next week, we hope that you will take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye. In Other News is a presentation of Next Pittsburgh and is proudly produced by us, along with our amazing team, Emma Honcharski and Margie Ruttenberg. Our editor is Sorgatron Media, and original music by Jack Swing.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please like and share this episode and rate and review us wherever you're listening. It really helps us grow. And if you're listening on the Next Pittsburgh website, take a minute to take a look around to learn more about all the cool stuff happening in our hometown.